Waruna, Vajrāsana,
the undefiable Dhamma.
Starving the viññāṇaya to death. There is this idea of starving the viññāṇaya to death by keeping from feeding it. Now we need to know what goes into feeding the viññāṇaya. We need to know what provides sustenance to the viññāṇaya, so that we can cut down its supply. We also need to know what this viññāṇaya is that we intend to kill. We need to know the cause of the viññāṇaya, its cessation from arising, and how it can be ceased from arising. Firstly, identify the viññāṇaya that we intend to kill. How does a viññāṇaya come to be? Be sure of what it is. What are the types of viññāṇa available? Mainly, there are 6 types of viññāṇa. They are categorized as 6 types of resultant consciousness or vipaka viññāṇa. These are karmically neutral consciousnesses resulting from past volitional actions or karma. Namely, they are the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. When the eye consciousness is underway, the occurrence of an ear consciousness is impossible. We need to know the nature of these consciousnesses before drawing conclusions as to what they are. The eye consciousness gets fabricated causally, or in other words, as a result of its cause. What is a cause and what is its effect? The eye consciousness is the effect or the result. What is its cause? It has been caused by the cause of actions that is explained as Chakkunja paticca rūpeca upajjati chakku viññāṇa. Dependent on the eye and the visual object, from their congruity, there arises the eye consciousness. The eye became congruent with the visual object, or the rūpaya. What happens in this process? A visual object comes in contact with the eye, or when a visual object became the subject of the eye, from such pairing arises the eye consciousness as a result. Thus, eye consciousness manifests the moment the eye comes in contact with the visual object. The eye consciousness is a descendant of the eye and the visual object. The arising of a thought process or a citta viti is governed by citta niyama, or laws on thoughts. This is a matter comprehensible only by an omniscient Lord Buddha. The eye consciousness does not get fabricated on its own. There is a method that is followed when a thought process or citta viti relating to a certain eye consciousness arise. The eye consciousness is only one of the thought moments or cittakshana within that thought process. The remaining thought moments within the thought process are related to the mind consciousness. There are 17 thought moments within a particular thought process. This process arises karmically right from the moment the eye meets the visual object. The eye has been fabricated from karmic force which arise karmically. The eye is maintained by the life faculty or jivitendriya. The process of drawing in visual object and positioning the attention on the visual object by the eye consciousness is all carried out with karmic force. The process is driven by karma, is based on karma. With it being operational, the conditions described by Chakkunca Paticca Rupeca are established, and almost at the same moment, the effects described by Uppajjati Chakku Viññāṇaṁ are manifested. But in this process, there are pre-generated and post-generated phenomena. The eye and the visual object arise beforehand, at least momentarily. Eye consciousness is a cognition that arises subsequently from the sensory contact between the eye and the visual object. The eye consciousness lasts while the sensory contact is ongoing. The process can be better explained with the use of an analogy. The chime prevails so long the bell is ringing. The drum beat is audible only while the drum is played. The moment it is stopped, the drum beat is no longer heard. When the drum is struck with hand or a stick, a sound emits. If the drum is no longer beaten, no sound is emitted. There is a cause for the drum beat. For the drum beat to manifest, one has to keep on striking the drum with a stick. The stick and the surface of the drum has to come into contact with each other. With one strike, the sound manifests one time. Beyond that, the sound is heard no longer. There would be a certain amount of emission of sound. Once a bell is rung one time, one ding sound emits, and there would be a bit of a vibration, and that would be all. For the ding sound to be heard again, the bell has to be rung once more. Similarly, when a modicum of eye consciousness arises, there would be a vibration for a moment. When it is rung one time, a sound is heard. Similarly, when the eye comes into contact with the visual object, the eye consciousness arises. A modicum of cognition or the disposition of seeing arises. The cognition is detected as seen. When the visual object is seen, there could never be the detection of another stimuli or sense object. It is impossible for another consciousness to be established at the same time. Thus, at each moment, there could only be one consciousness. This is what that has been explained in the verse Sannimhi samanake kyama mate kalebare lokancha panya peti. The world is enacted only within this modicum of action which contains perceptions and mind. Nowadays, this has been described as the world is enacted within this body having the length of 6 feet. A sentient being is manifested momentarily within this modicum of action only. No two consciousnesses ever arise simultaneously. For example, two eye consciousnesses or an eye consciousness and a nose consciousness, they never arise at once. At any given moment, there will only be a single modicum of consciousness. There is only a modicum of consciousness to a sentient being, and no sentient being possesses two modicums of consciousness at any given time. If there are, they have to belong to two sentient beings. This is a deep Dhamma matter. The question is on such a deep Dhamma matter. We can do nothing about the resultant consciousness or the vipaka viññāṇa. There is a method of terminating the arising of the resultant consciousness with the Nirodha Samapattiya. Under normal conditions, the arising of the resultant consciousness is inevitable. This resultant consciousness is not capable of driving the samsaric journey. Frankly, we do not have to strive to cease it from arising. There is no need to stop the eye from seeing, no need to stop the ear from hearing. The hearing in itself would not add to the samsaric journey. The samsaric journey which we are suffering is not fabricated with mere seeing or hearing. Detecting a smell with the nose would not in itself fabricate the samsaric journey. Detecting a taste with the tongue would not itself fabricate the samsaric journey. Detecting bodily touches would not in itself fabricate the samsaric journey. Another type of consciousness is responsible for driving the samsaric journey. That would be some mind consciousness that arises as a result of binding with pleasure with some visual object that was captured by the eye. The mind consciousness thus fabricated is accompanied by blind infatuation or chandaraga. There are those thoughts, actions and words that fabricate this kind of mind consciousnesses. If such thoughts, actions and words are wholesome, the related consciousness too would be a wholesome one. Sometimes the resultant consciousness is neither wholesome nor unwholesome. The Arahants have this sort of consciousness. They are called Punya Papa Pahinasa, meaning the ones who have ended all wholesome and unwholesome actions. They do encounter the resultant consciousness, but those resultant consciousnesses are not capable of fueling the samsaric journey. He sees things all right, but that seeing would not lengthen the samsaric journey. He hears sounds, but that would not lengthen the samsaric journey. What is required to fuel the samsaric journey? If there is a mind consciousness that is fabricated based on a wholesome or an unwholesome course of actions accompanied by blind infatuation, the mind consciousness has to be either wholesome, unwholesome or aninjabi in nature. If the sankhara that goes into fabricating the mind consciousness is wholesome, so would be the mind consciousness. And if the sankhara is unwholesome, so would be the mind consciousness. If the sankhara is aninjabi in nature, so would the related mind consciousness. This is not a resultant consciousness, but it is fabricated by choice. We need to be wary of this consciousness. If this consciousness is fabricated with blind infatuation, that is certainly accompanied by clinging and false knowledge. This is a consciousness that arises in line with the phrase Sankhara Pacaya Viññāṇaṁ. It arises having Sankhara as the condition. We need to know of this consciousness more closely. What would be the nature of this consciousness if it is accompanied by false knowledge? This consciousness gives rise to something. It becomes a seed that would contribute to the extension of the samsaric journey. We need to understand this consciousness properly. It is this consciousness that we need to starve to death. This consciousness is not a resultant consciousness. It is not mere seeing or hearing. When the worldly phenomena are discerned as Nitya, Sukha, Atta, which is the misled conclusion of false knowledge, thoughts would arise aspiring the worldly phenomena. It is this kind of thoughts, this kind of consciousness that we need to cease from arising. Now that we know what we need to starve, we need to know what goes into feeding them. The karmic actions or the mental fabrications arise with false knowledge as a condition. Then the consciousness arises with karmic actions as the condition. Now we have to come to terms with what the consciousness is and what its origination is. We cannot really identify the mere thoughts as consciousness. The mere thoughts will not drive the samsaric journey. We need to distinguish the consciousness that drives the samsaric journey. This is known as seeing the consciousness for what it is, determining the consciousness for what it is. Just chanting viññāṇaṁ aniccaṁ, viññāṇaṁ dukkhaṁ over and over again will not be useful unless one has got this clarified. Investigate as to what the consciousness is. What is its nature? What sort of consciousness would pose a threat to our cause of achieving nirvana? What sort of consciousness should be dispelled? Let us now understand these things in detail. If karmic actions or mental fabrications arise with false knowledge as the condition, and then if certain consciousness arise with the karmic action as the condition, we should be wary of such consciousnesses. This consciousness would drive the samsaric journey. The samsaric journey in turn yields great suffering. Therefore, this would be the consciousness that would cause future suffering. We should be aware of the dangers they are bringing in. Now that we know what consciousness is, let us now explore its arising. How does this consciousness arise? It is fabricated along with other phenomena called sensations, perceptions, mental fabrications. Their combination gives rise to something, and that something is the consciousness, the arising of the consciousness. We need to discern how the consciousness comes to be. This sort of consciousness that we are considering right now has its dangers. It causes the manifestation of suffering. As long as this consciousness arises, the samsaric journey will keep on extending. As long as it arises, no one is able to escape the samsaric suffering, even if he wants to. This consciousness arises accompanied by blind infatuation. One might be of the view that seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, and tasting things are worthy and pleasurable. He would think of keep on tasting things, feeling bodily touches, as well as keep on recollecting those sensations. This is a consciousness that is accompanied by blind infatuation. This is a consciousness that should be dispelled. Having this mentality will make it impossible to part with the consciousness. Thus, the consciousness will not be ceased from arising. This consciousness is accompanied by false knowledge. The resultant consciousness that arises while hearing and seeing things is not accompanied by false knowledge. The resultant consciousness is responsible for smelling and tasting things as well as for sensing bodily touches. Things crossing the mind, sensing things, sensing life, all are the work of the resultant consciousness. There is another side that goes beyond this disposition. Relishing and aspiring these consciousnesses, pursuing them with blind infatuation, is led by false knowledge. The course of actions carried out with mind, word and body to re-establish those consciousnesses is explained by the phrase avidya paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya viññāṇaya. This is the arising of consciousness which provides the sustenance for the consciousness. If this sustenance for the consciousness is ceased from arising, the consciousness too would get ceased from arising. What sort of consciousness would be ceased this way? The consciousness that is driven by false knowledge and which causes the progression of the samsaric journey would be ceased from arising. Avidya yatteva asesa viraga nirodha sankhara nirodha. Sankhara nirodha viññāṇa nirodha. This is a method to be followed. If the false knowledge is ceased without a trace, sankhara too would be ceased from arising. If sankhara is ceased from arising, so would the consciousness, which is dependent on sankhara for sustenance. Now we know what the consciousness is, its cause, its cessation from arising, and the path to cease it from arising. Now we know the kind of consciousness that is dangerous. It concerns with the wholesome and unwholesome course of actions that are driven by blind infatuation. The arising of consciousness is explained by the phrase avidya paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya viññāṇaya. When we have understood the value in ceasing this consciousness from arising, we are incurred with a question as to how it can be achieved. When we are trying to cease something from arising, it cannot be achieved by fabricating something or by exerting effort to remove it. Frankly, we do not have to try to do anything. The cessation of the consciousness from arising can be achieved by one method, that is to see its truth with wisdom. When we see the truth of things as they are, we realize that we are pursuing things that are not worth pursuing. Let's go back to our issue. What causes the fabrication of consciousness? Firstly, the resultant consciousnesses such as eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness arise. Then pleasure is yielded from these resultant consciousnesses, and a mentality is incurred to associate with related sensations to fabricate similar consciousnesses. A compulsive mentality is triggered to keep on hearing what was heard or seen. And karmic actions or mental fabrications are executed to facilitate the continuous hearing or seeing. A compulsive mentality is triggered to keep on smelling what was smelled, and karmic actions or mental fabrications are executed to facilitate the continuous smelling. Karmic actions are executed to facilitate the continuous sensing of bodily touches. going beyond the touch that was originally sensed with the resultant consciousnesses. The consciousness that is operational, while this restless mentality of having to pursue visual objects, sounds, orders, touches, mental objects is underway, is a type of consciousness that leads to the suffering of sentient beings. So what should be done to rid it? If false knowledge is dispelled, sankhara would follow suit. False knowledge cannot be dispelled by force. How to get rid of darkness without shedding some light? Without introducing a light source, how can anyone remove the darkness? It is impossible to remove the darkness unless the light comes to be. So how are we going to introduce light? One might say, light some lamp or a light bulb. Does he have to say exclusively, now remove the darkness also? He has nothing left to do beyond lighting the lamp to remove the darkness. With the lighting of the lamp, the place would have been lit up. Now there is nothing left to do to exclusively remove the darkness. It has already been dealt with. To part with darkness without using light would be impossible. There will not be any method to execute that. Similarly, without removing false knowledge, it is impossible to part with the false knowledge-driven conclusions. In other words, the volitional thoughts that arise having false knowledge as a condition are inevitably fabricated. What is the conclusion of false knowledge? The world is beloved, preferred, good, and should not be renounced. This is a conclusion of the darkness. Demanding to get rid of the darkness will not make any difference. Without introducing light, it is impossible to remove darkness. It is the same case with false knowledge. So what should be done? The attempt to get rid of the false knowledge should be renounced. Rather, one must strive to get the wisdom emerged. Without trying to remove the darkness, one has to try and ignite some light. What cannot be done cannot be done. When the light appears, the darkness would not stand a chance. It escapes. It perishes on the spot. It is impossible to find the direction it went. The darkness diminished in the face of the light. It has not escaped anywhere. The darkness is not something like that. It is a condition that is manifested because of the absence of the light. Similarly, the false knowledge is a condition that is manifested because of the absence of wisdom. It is a condition that prevails in the absence of the right knowledge. The wisdom brings about the right knowledge. There is a method of contemplating the worldly phenomena in terms of anicca, dukkha, anatta. When these characteristics are reflected upon, the non-essence of the worldly phenomena is understood, and the light of wisdom arises, diminishing the darkness then and there. Afterwards, the conclusions of the wrong knowledge will not be operational anymore. Everywhere the truth of things become apparent. The inappropriate, unfulfilling, and unsatisfying nature becomes apparent. The fact that the inappropriate, unfulfilling, and unsatisfying things are harmful devoid of substance and of no essence, become apparent. The worldly phenomena are seen as inappropriate, unfulfilling, and unsatisfying, or anissi, and of no essence, or asara. They are identified as causing suffering, including physical pain, mental pain, and fatigue. This is the decision of wisdom. When this contemplation is in progress, the light of wisdom emerges. It diminishes the false knowledge. When these matters have been properly grasped, it is understood that to cease suffering from arising, one in fact needs to cease the consciousness from arising. That would pave the path to the cessation of suffering from arising. The phrase avidya paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya viññāṇa has to be considered in order to cease the consciousness from arising. To cease the consciousness from arising, the false knowledge has to be ceased from arising. For that, the right knowledge has to emerge. That would be the only way to see off the false knowledge. What happens with the emergence of the right knowledge? Avidya yatteva asesa viraga nirodha, sankhara nirodho. Yo tassa eva tanhaya asesa viraga nirodha, sankhara nirodho. With the cessation of both false knowledge and craving without a trace, sankhara would be ceased from arising. Sankhara will not be ceased from arising on its own. If one resolves to stay without doing any action from word, mind, and body, that would not cease the sankhara from arising. That too would be as futile as the exercise of trying to remove darkness. To bring about light, one needs to come to terms with reality. Need to think, speak, and act realistically. With the emergence of light, the false knowledge would be dispelled. There would be nothing else to be done to rid the darkness. So, we should strive to get the light emerged somehow, rather than trying to remove the darkness. With the emergence of light, there will not be any darkness remaining pending removal. Any exercise to remove darkness without introducing a light source is bound to be unsuccessful. Many folk just spell out the mantra, renounce everything. But just because they say no renunciation is possible, there is a method to follow. So what should be done to bring about light? Think wisely and investigate if what the wisdom implies is actually out there among the worldly phenomena that we associate with. See it for yourself. It will be sensible to your wisdom. With the emergence of the light of wisdom, you would realize that the worldly phenomena are inappropriate, unfulfilling, and unsatisfying, and of no essence. There is another characteristic that goes hand in hand, the characteristic of suffering. These together can be presented as anicca, dukkha, anatta. All the aspirations previously held over worldly phenomena become shattered with the emerging right knowledge. There would be nothing else to do. This is what is meant by the starving of the consciousness to death. Without sustenance, the consciousness goes dead. If the consciousness is ceased from arising by the cessation of sustenance to the consciousness, the samsaric journey will come to a halt. How so? It is governed by an underlying theory, and in accordance with this theory, the cessation of the consciousness would be brought about. Viññāna nirodha, nāmarupa nirodho. Nāmarupa nirodha, salayatana nirodho. Salayatana nirodha, phassa nirodho. Phassa nirodha, vedana nirodho. Vedana nirodha, tanha nirodho. Tanha nirodha, upadana nirodho. Upadana nirodha, bhava nirodho. Bhava nirodha, jati nirodho. Jati nirodha, jara, marana, shoka, parideva, dukkha, domanasa, upayasa, nirojjanti. Eva mevalasa, kevalasa, dukkhaskandha, nirodho hoti. In line with this Dhamma niyama, the cessation of phenomena would be governed. This Dhamma niyama will never change. These natural laws are certain. They are exact and cannot be changed. It cannot be changed to something else. It does not change to something else. These are the principles underlying the dependent origination. The natural laws are subject to tata, avitata, ananyata, and idam pachyata. Using the natural laws, it is possible to cease the consciousness from arising. In accordance with the dependent origination, the false knowledge is dispelled, and from there on, all subsequent links in the dependent origination will not be manifested. The moment the consciousness is ceased from arising, so would the mentality and corporeality, the 6 sense bases, the sensory contact, the sensation, the craving, the clinging, the becoming, and the arising. It is a norm, the underlying theory. Everything would cease from arising. What arises first? There is a method that is followed when the arising of incidental manifestations takes place. These arisings would contribute to the samsaric journey. These are the incidental arisings that manifest during the lifetime between rebirths. With enlightenment, with the firm understanding of Dhamma, these arisings will cease from arising. The false knowledge will not be able to dictate terms anymore. The thoughts still persist. Pabasara bidam bhikkhave chittam agantukehi upakilittena upakilittam. Radiant is the chitta, and it is defiled by external defilements. Once the defilements are parted with, the radiant chitta would remain. Under normal conditions, it is tainted with external defilements. The radiant chitta is free from raga, dvesha, and moha, and is not contributing to the progression of the samsaric journey. Until the remaining karmic force is exhausted, the radiant chitta would stand, and it would not add to the future samsaric journey. The radiant chitta does not cause suffering or future samsaric journey. There is no need to get rid of it. If one really has ample time, he might try attaining the Nirodha Samapattiya, abiding in ease here and now. With the Nirodha Samapattiya, it is possible to cease all chitta from arising, along with the accompanying perceptions and sensations for a given
Waharaka Thera Waruna, Wajrāsana.
the undefilable Dhamma.